Have you ever sacrificed your entire life for someone, only to discover they were just waiting for the moment they no longer needed you? I never imagined that after decades of raising my son alone, working endless overtime, and giving him everything I had, I'd spend Thanksgiving standing in a freezing train station with nowhere to go. But that's exactly where I ended up. And what happened after that day changed my life forever. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. Not because of the turkey. Not because of football. But because it was the one day every year when family was supposed to matter more than anything else. At least, that's what I'd believed for 68 years. Looking back now, I realize that morning started like every other morning I'd spent living in my son Kevin's Brooklyn townhouse. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the kitchen while Thanksgiving music played softly from a speaker on the counter. My daughter-in-law, Stephanie, was already seasoning the turkey with the kind of precision she'd learned from cooking shows. The grandchildren were laughing upstairs, arguing over which parade float they were most excited to see. For a few peaceful minutes, everything felt normal. I was peeling potatoes at the kitchen island, humming to myself, grateful that my hip had finally healed enough for me to stand comfortably. 8 months earlier, after my surgery, Kevin had insisted I move in with them. "Dad, don't even think about staying alone," he'd told me back then. "Recover here. Stay as long as you need." I believed him. Maybe I wanted to believe him. During those 8 months, I did everything I could to make sure I wasn't a burden. Every morning before sunrise, I walked Bailey, the family golden retriever, so Kevin could sleep another hour before work. I packed lunches for the kids. Picked them up from school every afternoon. Helped Emma with her math homework. Folded laundry. Vacuumed the house. Washed dishes before anyone asked. Paid rent every single month without missing a payment. Whenever groceries got expensive, I quietly covered the bill. And when Kevin admitted they were struggling to keep Emma enrolled in private school, I handed him $30,000 from my retirement savings without asking for a penny back. Seeing my granddaughter smile felt worth every dollar. I honestly believed families took care of each other. I had no idea those sacrifices were about to mean absolutely nothing. That's when Kevin walked into the kitchen. His expression immediately caught my attention. No smile. No "Happy Thanksgiving." No hug. Just a face so serious it made my stomach tighten. "Dad," he said quietly. "Can we talk for a minute?" Something in his voice made the room suddenly feel colder. I dried my hands on a kitchen towel and smiled anyway. "Sure, son. What's going on?" Kevin glanced toward Stephanie. She slowly crossed her arms without saying a word. That simple movement sent a chill through me. I'd seen that look before. It was the same expression people wore when they had already made up their minds. Kevin took a slow breath. "We've been talking about this for a while." My heart started pounding. "And?" He stared at the hardwood floor instead of looking at me. "We think it's time for you to move out." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. I even laughed. "Move out?" Nobody laughed with me. Stephanie finally spoke. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "Robert, we've tried to make this work, but the house feels crowded." "Crowded?" I looked around the spacious kitchen, confused. "I stay in the guest room." "It's more than that," she continued. "The kids need their own routine. Emma needs space for her art supplies. We need privacy." I blinked. "I don't understand." Kevin finally met my eyes. "Dad, we just want our house back." Those words landed harder than any punch I'd ever taken. I searched his face, hoping to find even a hint of regret. Instead, I saw relief. "I pay rent," I said quietly. "I buy groceries. I help with the kids every single day. I've tried to stay out of your way." Kevin rubbed the back of his neck. We know. Then what did I do wrong? Silence. Not one answer. Finally Stephanie sighed. This isn't about something you did. It's about our family. I felt my chest tighten. I am your family. She looked away. Kevin swallowed hard before saying words I'll never forget. Dad, you're 68. You should be somewhere warmer. Maybe Florida. Maybe Arizona. We even looked at some really nice assisted living communities. I stared at him in complete disbelief. Assisted living? My hip needed surgery. My mind didn't. I'm perfectly capable of living on my own. Kevin shrugged awkwardly. Then, that's what you should do. But not here. The room suddenly felt unbearably quiet. Outside, I could hear neighborhood children laughing as they played in the crisp November air. Inside, everything I'd spent a lifetime building with my son was falling apart. And then came the sentence that shattered whatever hope I still had. Stephanie looked directly at me. I think today would be best. I frowned. What do you mean, today? She answered without hesitation. Kevin can drive you to South Station. You can figure out where you want to go from there. I stared at both of them. Today is Thanksgiving. We know, Kevin replied. That's exactly why we need to do it now. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, you're throwing me out before dinner? Neither of them answered. Instead, Kevin quietly admitted something that hurt even more. We already told the rest of the family you had another trip planned. My jaw dropped. You lied? We didn't want everyone asking questions, he said. It would just create unnecessary drama. I looked at the son I'd raised by myself after his mother walked away when he was only 7 years old. The boy I'd worked double shifts for. The teenager whose college tuition I'd paid in full so he could graduate debt-free. The man I thought would always have my back. But standing in front of me wasn't the son I remembered. It was someone I barely recognized. I took one long breath. Then another. Finally, I nodded. If that's really what you want. Kevin looked relieved. Stephanie immediately turned toward the hallway. I'll pack your bag. She disappeared upstairs before I could say another word. I stood there frozen, listening to drawers opening and zippers closing. As someone else decided which pieces of my life were worth taking with me. I had no idea. The humiliation waiting for me over the next few hours would be even worse. Kevin thought dropping me off at a train station with $45 would be the end of my story. Neither of us could have imagined that before the sun set, a complete stranger would change my life forever. Kevin thought leaving me at a train station with $45 would solve his problem. He had no idea. That one cruel decision was about to lead me to the most unbelievable encounter of my entire life. The drive to Boston felt longer than it actually was. Nearly 2 hours passed, but neither of us said much. The silence between us was louder than any argument could have been. Outside the passenger window, neighborhoods slipped by one after another. Families carried grocery bags into warm homes. Children chased each other through front yards wearing colorful jackets. Every porch seemed decorated with pumpkins, wreaths, or tiny American flags fluttering in the cold November breeze. Everyone looked like they were heading toward people who loved them. I was heading toward absolutely no one. Kevin filled the silence by talking about everything except the one thing that mattered. Housing prices. The stock market. His company's newest project. Interest rates. It sounded like two coworkers making small talk during a lunch break, not a son driving his father away on Thanksgiving. I stared out the window, barely hearing a word. My mind kept replaying every sacrifice I'd ever made for him. The overtime shifts. The sleepless nights. The birthdays I missed because I had to work. The vacations I never took because college tuition came first. Somewhere along the way, I'd convinced myself those sacrifices meant something. Now I wasn't so sure. Finally, Kevin pulled beneath the covered entrance of South Station. The station buzzed with holiday travelers. People hurried in every direction, dragging rolling suitcases across the pavement while loved ones hugged goodbye before catching their trains. The atmosphere was full of excitement. Mine was filled with heartbreak. Kevin shifted the car into park. Neither of us moved. For several uncomfortable seconds, all I could hear was the engine idling. Then he reached into his wallet. He counted out two $20 bills. Then dug into the coin pocket before pulling out a crumpled $5. He handed me the money. Here. I looked down. $45. That was it. I couldn't help smiling. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes pain reaches a point where laughter is the only thing keeping you from falling apart. You think this will cover Thanksgiving night in Boston? Kevin looked uncomfortable. It'll help with a cab, or something. Or something. Those two words echoed in my head. He had no idea hotel rooms in Boston were nearly impossible to find during a holiday weekend. Even the cheapest places were charging prices I couldn't afford. Still, I folded the money carefully and slipped it into my wallet. I refused to let him see how deeply he'd hurt me. He cleared his throat. Text me once you get settled somewhere. I nodded. I will. He opened his mouth again. Dad. For one tiny moment, hope crept into my heart. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe he was about to tell me to come home. Maybe this had all been some horrible misunderstanding. Instead, he quietly said, "This is really for the best." I looked at him. Really looked at him. The little boy who used to climb onto my shoulders to watch 4th of July fireworks. The teenager who cried when he lost his first basketball championship. The young man who hugged me after graduating college because neither of us thought we'd ever make it that far. He was still sitting there. But somehow, he was gone. Happy Thanksgiving, son. The words came out softer than I expected. He blinked, almost surprised I'd said them. You too, Dad. Then he closed the driver's door. Started the engine. Pulled away from the curb. And never looked back. I stood there watching his BMW disappear into traffic until I couldn't see it anymore. It wasn't just the car that vanished. It felt like the last piece of the life I'd spent 40 years building disappeared with it. The November wind cut straight through my jacket. I tightened my grip on the worn duffel bag Stephanie had packed for me. I hadn't even been allowed to choose what was inside. For all I knew, half my belongings were still sitting in their guest room closet. Or maybe already headed for the trash. I walked slowly into South Station. The warmth inside hit me immediately. So did the noise. Train announcements echoed through the enormous terminal. Children laughed. Couples reunited with hugs. College students rushed toward departing platforms. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with cinnamon rolls drifted through the crowded station. Everywhere I looked, people belonged somewhere. I didn't. After wandering for several minutes, I found an empty bench beneath the large departure board. I lowered myself carefully onto it, my hip reminding me that recovery wasn't quite finished. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to think. What now? I pulled out my phone and searched for nearby hotels. The cheapest room I found was nearly $150. Another required a rental car. Most were completely sold out. I checked my bank account. Just over $400. My next Social Security payment wouldn't arrive for another 2 weeks. If I stayed in hotels, My money would disappear within days. I leaned back against the cold metal bench and rubbed my tired eyes. At 68 years old, I had become something I never imagined. Homeless. On Thanksgiving, the realization settled over me like a heavy blanket. Not because I had nowhere to sleep, but because I had nowhere I was truly wanted. My parents were gone. My older brother had passed away 3 years earlier. My sister and I hadn't spoken since our mother's funeral after a bitter disagreement neither of us had ever fixed. Most of my army buddies had scattered across the country decades ago. Life had happened. People moved. Phone numbers changed. Friendships faded. And now, the one person I'd always believed would never abandon me had. I lowered my head into my hands. For the first time since Kevin told me to leave, the tears finally came. Quietly. Silently. I cried where no one could see my face. Not because I wanted sympathy. Because I honestly didn't know what I was supposed to do next. Minutes passed. Maybe 10. Maybe 20. Time stopped mattering. Then, a calm, steady voice broke through the noise of the station. Looks like Thanksgiving hasn't been very kind to you. I slowly lifted my head. About 6 feet away sat an elderly man in a wheelchair. He wore an elegant charcoal overcoat that looked custom-made. His silver hair was perfectly combed. A small American flag pin rested neatly on his lapel. His face carried deep wrinkles that spoke of decades of experience. But his eyes were incredibly sharp. And surprisingly warm. He wasn't staring at me with pity. He was looking at me with understanding. Almost as if he already knew exactly what I'd been through. I had no idea that walking over to speak with that stranger would completely rewrite the rest of my life. I thought the elderly man in the wheelchair was just making small talk. I had no idea that a 5-minute conversation with a complete stranger would completely rewrite the future I thought I'd lost forever. For a few seconds, I simply looked at him. The train station bustled around us with the usual Thanksgiving chaos, families rushing to platforms, children laughing, conductors announcing departures over the loudspeakers, but somehow, everything around us seemed to fade into the background. The gentleman sat calmly in his wheelchair as if he had nowhere else he'd rather be. His posture was straight. His clothes were immaculate. Even in a crowded station, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime making difficult decisions. But it wasn't his appearance that caught my attention. It was the kindness in his eyes. There was no curiosity. No judgment. Just genuine concern. I managed a tired smile. You could say today's been rough. He chuckled softly. I've been watching you for a little while. That caught me off guard. You have? He nodded. You've checked your phone several times. You searched something on it, probably hotels. You sighed more than once. And every few minutes you looked at that departure board like you hoped one of those trains might magically solve your problems. Despite everything I'd been through that day, I couldn't help letting out a quiet laugh. I guess I'm not very hard to read. No, he replied warmly. Not today. He studied me for another moment before speaking again. Family? The single word hit harder than I expected. I looked down at the floor. Yeah. He nodded slowly. I figured. His voice remained gentle. Nobody spends Thanksgiving sitting alone in a train station with one duffel bag unless something important has fallen apart. I swallowed hard. For hours I'd been holding everything inside. Trying to stay strong. Trying not to embarrass myself. But something about this stranger made pretending feel impossible. My son threw me out today. The words escaped before I could stop them. He didn't interrupt. Didn't look shocked. He simply listened. I'm 68 years old, I continued. I moved in after hip surgery. I paid rent. I helped raise my grandkids. I cooked. I cleaned. I walked their dog every morning. I even gave them $30,000 from my retirement savings when they needed help. My voice cracked. And this morning, they told me I was taking up too much space. I looked away, ashamed that my eyes were beginning to water. They packed my bag while I was in the bathroom. Drove me here. Handed me $45. And wished me a happy Thanksgiving. For several long seconds. The gentleman didn't say anything. His expression grew heavier with every word. Finally he exhaled slowly. I'm truly sorry. There was something different about the way he said it. Most people apologize because they don't know what else to say. He sounded like he genuinely felt my pain. I don't understand, I admitted. I spent my entire life trying to be a good father. He nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the people who love us the least are the ones we've sacrificed the most for. That sentence lingered between us. Then, almost unexpectedly, he tilted his head. What branch? I frowned. What? The military. You served. I blinked. How did you know? A faint smile crossed his face. The way you carry yourself. You sit up straight even when you're exhausted. Your haircut is practical. You keep scanning exits without realizing you're doing it. And he pointed toward my hands. You've got the hands of someone who spent years doing work. I looked down and laughed quietly. I guess old habits never disappear. They rarely do. He extended his hand. Army? I reached forward. Army. What years? 67 through 75. 2 tours. His eyes brightened. So was I. He squeezed my hand firmly. Infantry. Vietnam. For the first time that entire day, I felt something I hadn't expected. Connection. Not because we had fought in the same places, but because another veteran instantly understood things that didn't need explaining. My name's Robert. Harold Montgomery. His handshake was remarkably strong. The kind earned through decades of determination. After a brief silence, Harold looked toward the station entrance before turning back to me. I'm going to ask you something unusual. I raised an eyebrow. How unusual? He smiled. Enough that you'll probably think I've lost my mind. I couldn't help smiling back. Try me. My driver should have arrived 10 minutes ago. Traffic, I suppose. He paused. While we're waiting, I'd like you to come home with me. I stared at him. I'm sorry. What? My staff prepared Thanksgiving dinner. There'll be more food than any one person could possibly eat. And he looked around the crowded station. I'd rather not spend the holiday eating alone. I shook my head in disbelief. You don't even know me. I know enough. You know almost nothing. Harold leaned back comfortably. I know you're a veteran. I know your son broke your heart. I know you've thanked every employee who's walked past this bench. I looked at him, confused. He continued. When the janitor emptied the trash can a few minutes ago, you thanked him. He smiled. Most people never even notice workers like him. I hadn't realized Harold had been paying attention. And when that little girl dropped her teddy bear over there, he pointed across the station. You started getting up to help before her mother reached it. I remembered the moment. I hadn't even thought about it afterward. Harold smiled. Little things reveal character. He looked directly into my eyes. Money impresses people. Character impresses me. I didn't know what to say. No one had spoken to me that way in years. Finally I asked quietly. "Why are you doing this?" His expression softened. "Because I've spent enough years learning that loneliness is a terrible thing. And because today..." He looked around the station. "I think the universe decided two old soldiers needed to meet." Before I could answer, a sleek black Mercedes van rolled to the curb outside the station. A professionally dressed woman stepped out and hurried toward us. She immediately lowered a wheelchair ramp with practiced efficiency. "I'm terribly sorry for the delay, Mr. Montgomery." The highway was completely backed up. "No harm done, Clara," Harold replied calmly. He gestured toward me. "This is my cousin Robert." For a split second, the woman looked surprised. Only for a heartbeat. Then she smiled professionally. "It's wonderful to meet you, Mr. Thornton." She never questioned it. Never hesitated. Harold turned back toward me. "So?" he asked with a grin. "Are you willing to pretend we're cousins for one Thanksgiving dinner?" I hesitated. Every logical thought told me not to trust a stranger. But another voice inside me asked a different question. What exactly did I have left to lose? No home. No plans. No family waiting for me. Only uncertainty. I slowly nodded. "I'd be honored." Harold's smile widened. "Excellent." Then his expression became mysteriously serious. "But Robert, there's one thing you should know. When we get to my house, don't let what you see surprise you." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He chuckled. "You'll understand soon enough." As Clara helped him into the van, I picked up my worn duffel bag and climbed in behind him. I had absolutely no idea that the destination we were heading toward wasn't just another house. It was the place where my entire life was about to begin again. As the Mercedes left Boston behind, I expected we were driving to an ordinary suburban home. 40 minutes later, giant iron gates slowly opened. And I found myself staring at a property so breathtaking that I wondered if I'd somehow stepped into someone else's life. I thought the man in the wheelchair was simply making conversation. I couldn't have been more wrong. Within the next few minutes, he would make me an offer so unbelievable. I almost laughed in his face. I thought I was heading to a nice suburban home for Thanksgiving dinner. What I saw 40 minutes later left me completely speechless. And before the night was over, an aging billionaire would reveal a secret that would change both of our lives forever. The black Mercedes glided smoothly through the evening traffic, leaving the busy streets of Boston behind. For the first several minutes, neither Harold nor I spoke much. The soft hum of the engine filled the silence while city buildings slowly gave way to quiet suburbs lined with towering maple trees that had already shed most of their autumn leaves. Streetlights flickered on one by one as dusk settled over New England. I glanced around the van. The interior looked more luxurious than any vehicle I'd ever ridden in. Cream-colored leather seats. Polished walnut trim. A custom wheelchair lift built seamlessly into the floor. Even the lighting felt warm and relaxing. Everything about it reflected quiet wealth, not flashy or boastful, just unmistakably expensive. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. "Harold." He looked over with a friendly smile. "Yes? I appreciate your kindness. I really do. But I still don't understand why you're doing this." He looked out the window before answering. "Sometimes life introduces us to exactly the person we need." He smiled faintly. "I've learned not to argue with those moments." His answer only deepened the mystery. Before I could ask another question, Clara's voice came through the intercom. "We're almost home, Mr. Montgomery." Home. The word sounded simple enough. Until we arrived. About 40 minutes after leaving South Station, the van slowed near a massive wrought iron gate surrounded by towering stone pillars. A small bronze plaque displayed a single name: Montgomery Estate. The gates opened silently. Not because someone came to greet us, but because hidden cameras had already recognized the vehicle. I watched in stunned silence as we drove onto a long private road winding through acres of beautifully maintained woodland. Ancient oak trees stretched toward the darkening sky. Elegant lanterns illuminated the driveway every few yards. Perfectly trimmed hedges bordered colorful flower gardens that somehow still looked beautiful even in late November. I couldn't even see the house yet. Only the grounds. And they were already larger than most public parks I'd visited. Finally, we rounded one last curve. My breath caught. Standing proudly in the distance was an enormous Georgian-style mansion glowing beneath the golden lights of sunset. White columns stretched 2 stories high. Brick walls gleamed with timeless elegance. Dozens of windows reflected the fading evening sky. A grand fountain stood in the center of a circular driveway, its water sparkling beneath carefully placed landscape lights. The entire estate looked less like someone's home, and more like something you'd expect to see in a historical magazine. Without thinking, I whispered, "My God." Harold chuckled. My wife used to say the exact same thing every time we returned from vacation. I looked over. "You own all of this?" He nodded modestly. "My wife, Margaret, and I bought it back in the early 70s. It wasn't nearly this beautiful back then. It was falling apart." He smiled as memories filled his eyes. "Most people thought we were crazy. But Margaret fell in love with the place. She said she could already see what it would become." His voice softened. "So, we spent 20 years restoring it together." I noticed the way he smiled when he spoke her name. Not the smile of someone remembering a house, but someone remembering the love of his life. Even decades later, she was still present in every sentence. The van stopped beneath the covered entrance. Before I could open my own door, it was already being held open by a gentleman wearing a perfectly pressed vest and white gloves. He looked to be in his early 60s. Professional. Calm. Respectful. "Welcome home, Mr. Montgomery." Then he turned toward me. "And you must be Mr. Robert." His smile was genuine. "Welcome." Not a hint of surprise. Not a single awkward question. It was as though Harold had invited unexpected guests hundreds of times before. "I'm Charles," the man introduced himself. "I oversee the household." Harold smiled. "Charles, please have Mrs. Patterson prepare another place for dinner. And would you mind getting the Williamsburg suite ready?" Charles nodded immediately. "Everything has already been prepared, sir." "Prepared? For me?" I exchanged a puzzled glance with Harold. He simply smiled without offering an explanation. Walking through the front doors felt like stepping into another world. The entrance hall alone was larger than Kevin's entire first floor. An enormous crystal chandelier illuminated polished marble floors. Elegant staircases curved gracefully toward the second level. Original oil paintings lined the walls. Antique clocks quietly ticked from every corner. The air carried the comforting scent of burning oak from fireplaces somewhere deeper inside the mansion. Nothing felt cold or showy. Instead, the house felt lived in. Loved. Every room carried the warmth of decades of memories. As Charles led me upstairs, I noticed shelves overflowing with books, framed family photographs, and handwritten notes displayed. This wasn't simply the home of a wealthy man. It was the home of someone who treasured every chapter of his life. Charles stopped before a pair of handcrafted wooden doors. He opened them with a welcoming smile. "I hope you'll be comfortable here, Mr. Robert." I stepped inside. My jaw nearly hit the floor. The guest suite was larger than my first apartment. A massive four-poster bed stood in the center of the room. A stone fireplace crackled quietly. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked beautifully landscaped gardens. There was a private sitting area, a writing desk, fresh flowers, and a marble bathroom that looked nicer than luxury hotel suites I'd seen on television. Near the bed rested neatly folded clothes. A dress shirt. Slacks. A blazer. Even new shoes. I turned toward Charles. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else." He smiled knowingly. "No mistake. Mr. Montgomery always believes guests should feel at home." Then he quietly closed the door behind him. I stood alone in the room for several minutes. Everything happening felt impossible. That morning, I'd been thrown out of my son's house with one duffel bag. Now, I was standing inside one of the most beautiful homes I'd ever seen. None of it made sense. I walked to the window and looked out across the gardens. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to breathe. Maybe, just maybe, life wasn't finished with me yet. After showering and changing into the clothes waiting in the room, I made my way downstairs. The dining room was breathtaking. A polished mahogany table stretched nearly the length of the room. Crystal glasses reflected the candlelight. Fine china sat perfectly arranged beside silverware polished to a mirror shine. The meal looked like something from a holiday magazine. Golden roasted turkey. Fresh cranberry sauce. Creamy mashed potatoes. Homemade stuffing. Green beans. Sweet potatoes. Warm dinner rolls. Pumpkin pie cooling on a nearby sideboard. Yet despite the enormous table, only 2 places had been set. One for Harold. One for me. As I took my seat, I couldn't ignore the emptiness surrounding us. "This table could seat 20 people," I said quietly. Harold smiled sadly. "It used to." His answer lingered in the silence. Dinner began with light conversation. He asked about my years in the army. My career. My grandchildren. I found myself laughing for the first time in months. It felt strangely effortless. Almost like talking with an old friend. Then, halfway through dinner, Harold gently laid his fork on the table. His expression changed. There was something he had been waiting to say. "Robert, I need to tell you why I invited you here." The warmth in the room suddenly disappeared. I looked at him carefully. He folded his hands together. "I don't have much time left." I froze. "What do you mean?" He met my eyes. "The doctors say the cancer has spread. They're talking in months now. Not years." The words landed like a stone in my chest. I'm so sorry." He smiled peacefully. "I've already made peace with dying." He glanced around the massive dining room. "My problem isn't death. It's dying alone." I didn't know what to say. He looked at the dozens of empty chairs surrounding us. This house used to be full of laughter. My wife. My daughter. Our friends. He paused, fighting emotion. Now, it's just echoes. He looked directly at me. "And today, when I saw you sitting alone in that train station, I realized, maybe the universe wasn't sending help to just one lonely old man." His words sent chills through me. Because for the first time, I realized this Thanksgiving miracle wasn't only saving me. Somehow, I was saving him too. That night, Harold revealed the heartbreaking tragedy that had destroyed his family decades earlier. Then he made me an offer so unbelievable. I honestly thought he had to be joking. That Thanksgiving dinner wasn't just about sharing a meal. It became the night two broken men finally admitted the pain they'd been carrying for years. And before the evening was over, Harold would make me an offer so extraordinary that I couldn't believe he was serious. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The candles flickered softly across the long dining table while the fire crackled somewhere behind us. Outside, snowflakes had begun drifting gently through the cold November air, covering the gardens in a thin layer of white. Inside, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence shared by people who understood that some memories deserve time before words. Harold slowly picked up the framed photograph sitting beside his chair. It showed a beautiful brunette woman smiling beside a little girl with bright blue eyes. Both were laughing. Neither of them knew the camera had captured one of the happiest moments of their lives. "My wife," Harold said quietly. "Margaret." He smiled with unmistakable love. "We met in college. I was studying engineering. She was studying art. I thought I was the smartest man in the room." He chuckled. "She proved me wrong on our very first date." I couldn't help smiling. "You've been smiling every time you say her name." He looked down at the picture. "I still love her every single day." He gently ran his thumb across the frame. "People think grief fades. It doesn't. You simply learn how to carry it." His voice grew quieter. "We had one daughter. Sarah." He handed me the photograph. The little girl couldn't have been older than 11. She had Margaret's smile, Harold's eyes, and the kind of happiness every parent dreams of protecting forever. She was everything. His voice nearly broke. She loved horses, collected seashells, played piano, and she wanted to become a doctor because she said nobody should have to be sick. He stared into the fireplace. Then she got leukemia. The room suddenly felt colder. We fought for 2 years. Every specialist, every treatment, every experimental program we could find. His eyes filled with tears. I would have traded every dollar I owned, every building I'd ever purchased, every success I'd ever had, for one more birthday with my little girl. His hands trembled slightly. But life doesn't make bargains like that. I lowered my eyes. No father should ever have to bury his child. "No," Harold whispered. "No father should." He took a slow sip of water before continuing. "When Sarah passed away, Margaret never truly recovered. She smiled. She laughed. She kept living. But part of her stayed in that hospital room forever." He stared toward one of the empty chairs surrounding the table. 15 years ago, her heart finally gave out. The doctors called it a heart attack. He looked back at me. "I've always believed it was heartbreak." Neither of us spoke. There wasn't anything to say. Some pain doesn't need advice. It only needs someone willing to listen. Harold leaned back in his chair. After they were gone, I buried myself in work. I built office towers, shopping centers, apartment buildings, companies, foundations. His smile carried no pride. People called me successful. They wrote magazine articles. They gave me awards. They asked me how I'd built an empire. He looked around the enormous mansion. They never asked me why. His eyes met mine. I wasn't chasing money. I was running away from silence. That sentence hit me harder than anything else he'd said. Because I understood exactly what he meant. Sometimes people stay busy. Not because they're ambitious. Because slowing down forces them to feel. Harold folded his hands together. For the last several years, I've watched people. I looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" I attend charity events, hospitals, veterans organizations, fundraisers. I watch families interact. He shook his head sadly. You'd be amazed how many people mistake obligation for love. I listened quietly. I've watched children scroll through their phones while their elderly parents tried desperately to have a conversation. I've seen grandchildren counting the minutes until visits ended. I've watched wealthy families argue over inheritances while their parents were still alive. He sighed deeply. Real love has become surprisingly rare. Then he looked directly into my eyes. But today, I saw something different. I frowned. What did you see? A man whose heart had just been broken, and who still thanked the janitor. I blinked. A man who'd just been abandoned, and still wanted to help a child who dropped her toy. His smile returned. A man who spent more time talking about his grandchildren than he did about his own pain. I looked away, embarrassed. I'm nothing special. Harold shook his head. That's exactly what special people usually say. He reached into his sweater pocket and removed a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully before placing it on the table. Then he slid it toward me. I'd like you to stay here. I looked at him. What? Not tonight. I mean permanently. I stared at him, completely speechless. I don't understand. This house is too quiet. He looked around the empty dining room. I've spent years surrounded by employees. They're wonderful people. But when dinner ends, they go home. I'm left alone. He smiled gently. I don't want to spend whatever time I have left talking to empty chairs. I swallowed hard. You barely know me. I know enough. You've shown me more kindness in a few hours than some relatives have shown me in years. I laughed nervously. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. I slowly pushed the paper back toward him. I appreciate this. But I can't live here for free. My father would have never forgiven me. Harold smiled knowingly. I was hoping you'd say that. He reached into another folder. Then don't stay for free. He handed me another document. I need help organizing 50 years of journals, photographs, business records, letters Margaret saved, and the history of this family. He pointed toward the library. I've wanted to preserve everything before I'm gone. But I can't do it alone anymore. I looked at him. So, you want to hire me? He nodded. Exactly. As my personal assistant. I couldn't help laughing. I've never been anyone's assistant. You were an engineer. You served your country. You raised a family. I'm confident you can organize a few boxes. We both laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I'd shared with another person in longer than I could remember. Then Harold casually mentioned something that nearly made me choke on my coffee. The salary would be $50,000 a year. I stared at him. What? Plus full room and board. I almost dropped my fork. Harold. That's impossible. It isn't. I've already discussed it with my accountant. I insist. I won't let pride stop either one of us from getting exactly what we need. I sat there speechless. That morning, I'd been wondering where I'd sleep. Now someone was offering me a home, a job, a purpose, and dignity. Everything my own family had taken away. Tears blurred my vision. I don't know how to thank you. Harold smiled warmly. By saying yes. I laughed through my tears. I still feel like I'm dreaming. So do I. He extended his hand across the table. What do you say? I looked around the beautiful room. then toward the snow quietly falling outside. Finally, I reached across the table and shook his hand. "I'd be honored." Harold's smile grew wider than I'd seen all evening. "Wonderful." Then he grinned mischievously. "Now, finish your pumpkin pie. Tomorrow we're buying you clothes that actually fit." For the first time since Kevin drove away, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. Little did I know, those next 3 months would become the most meaningful months of my entire life. The weeks that followed transformed both of us in ways neither of us expected. But just when life finally felt peaceful, the people who had thrown me away suddenly came looking for me. And they weren't coming because they missed me. They were coming because they had discovered exactly who Harold Montgomery really was. For the first time in years, I finally felt like I belonged somewhere. Every morning gave me a reason to wake up. Every evening ended with meaningful conversations instead of loneliness. I honestly believed life had finally given me a second chance. But just when everything seemed to be falling into place, a knock at the front door threatened to destroy it all. The next few months passed faster than I could have imagined. Instead of counting the days, I started enjoying them. Every morning began the same way. Around 8 o'clock, Charles would set breakfast in the sunroom overlooking the gardens. Fresh coffee, warm biscuits, fruit picked from the greenhouse. Harold would already be waiting, newspaper folded beside his plate, always pretending he hadn't started eating because breakfast tastes better with company. It became our routine. And somehow, it felt like we'd known each other for years instead of weeks. After breakfast we'd head to Harold's study. Calling it a study hardly did it justice. The room looked more like a museum dedicated to one extraordinary life. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound journals, business records, military memorabilia, and thousands of photographs. Every wall held another memory. Pictures of ribbon-cutting ceremonies, military reunions, charity galas, family vacations, Christmas mornings, wedding anniversaries. The room wasn't filled with expensive decorations. It was filled with history. And Harold wanted every piece of it preserved. This wasn't simply the home of a wealthy man. It was the home of someone who treasured every chapter of his life. Charles stopped before a pair of handcrafted wooden doors. He opened them with a welcoming smile. "I hope you'll be comfortable here, Mr. Robert." I stepped inside. My jaw nearly hit the floor. The guest suite was larger than my first apartment. A massive 4-poster bed stood in the center of the room. A stone fireplace crackled quietly. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked beautifully landscaped gardens. There was a private sitting area, a writing desk, fresh flowers, and a marble bathroom that looked nicer than luxury hotel suites I'd seen on television. Near the bed rested neatly folded clothes. A dress shirt, slacks, a blazer, even new shoes. I turned toward Charles. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else." He smiled knowingly. "No mistake. Mr. Montgomery always believes guests should feel at home." Then he quietly closed the door behind him. I stood alone in the room for several minutes. Everything happening felt impossible. That morning, I'd been thrown out of my son's house with one duffel bag. Now, I was standing inside one of the most beautiful homes I'd ever seen. None of it made sense. I walked to the window and looked out across the gardens. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to breathe. Maybe, just maybe, life wasn't finished with me yet. After showering and changing into the clothes waiting in the room, I made my way downstairs. The dining room was breathtaking. A polished mahogany table stretched nearly the length of the room. Crystal glasses reflected the candlelight. Fine china sat perfectly arranged beside silverware polished to a mirror shine. The meal looked like something from a holiday magazine. Golden roasted turkey. Fresh cranberry sauce. Creamy mashed potatoes. Homemade stuffing. Green beans. Sweet potatoes. Warm dinner rolls. Pumpkin pie cooling on a nearby sideboard. Yet despite the enormous table, kids have wonderful imaginations. They do. He looked toward the sky. And somehow, I've never wanted to prove they were wrong. One chilly December afternoon we stopped beside a wooden bench overlooking a small pond. Birds gathered around a feeder hanging from a nearby maple tree. Harold watched them quietly. Margaret installed that feeder 30 years ago. I looked toward it. She loved birds. She said feeding them reminded her that even tiny acts of kindness matter. He smiled. Every winter we'd sit here together. He grew quiet. After she passed away, I couldn't bring myself to come back here. I understood without asking. Some places become sacred after the people we love are gone. Despite everything Harold had accomplished, he never spoke proudly about money. Instead, he talked about purpose. He taught me that success wasn't measured by bank accounts. It was measured by the people whose lives became better because you existed. One evening during dinner he looked at me and said something I'll never forget. You know, Robert, the strange thing about wealth. It solves problems. But it never cures loneliness. I nodded. I've learned loneliness can exist in a tiny apartment. Or a mansion. He smiled. Exactly. Those conversations slowly healed something inside me. The bitterness I carried toward Kevin didn't disappear. But it no longer controlled every thought. Harold never encouraged me to hate my son. In fact, he often reminded me that bitterness was another kind of prison. Forgiveness, he'd tell me, doesn't excuse what someone did. It simply refuses to let their actions keep hurting you forever. I wasn't ready to forgive Kevin. Not yet. But I started hoping someday I could. Kevin called 3 times during those months. Every conversation felt awkward. Hey, Dad. How are you doing? I'm okay. You find an apartment yet? I'm managing. He never asked where I was. Never asked if I needed anything. And I never volunteered the truth. Part of me wanted to protect Harold's privacy. Another part wanted to know whether Kevin actually missed me. Or simply missed everything I used to do for him. So I kept my new life to myself. Winter slowly gave way to late February. Snow still covered parts of the estate, but the first signs of spring were beginning to appear. That morning Harold and I were sitting in the library reviewing one of his earliest business journals. He laughed while reading an old entry. I completely forgot I nearly lost everything in 1974. I looked up. You? Oh, yes. My first shopping center almost bankrupted me. He grinned. Best mistake I ever made. Before I could ask why, there was a knock at the library door. Charles entered. But something was different. His calm expression had disappeared. Mr. Montgomery. Harold looked up. What is it, Charles? You have visitors. Harold raised an eyebrow. I wasn't expecting anyone. Charles hesitated. They're asking for Mr. Thornton. My stomach tightened immediately. For me? Charles nodded. A man and a woman. They insist they're family. The room suddenly felt very quiet. My heartbeat quickened. There was only one family who would come looking for me. Kevin. And Stephanie. I looked at Harold. I never told them where I was. He remained remarkably calm. The internet makes determined people very resourceful. He folded his journal closed. The real question isn't how they found you. It's why. I already knew the answer. At least, I thought I did. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling growing in my chest. Harold looked toward Charles. Please show them to the conservatory. We'll join them shortly. Charles nodded and quietly left. I stared down at my hands. They had started trembling. Harold gently placed a hand on my shoulder. No matter what happens, he said calmly, you won't face it alone. Those simple words gave me more strength than he probably realized. Together, we slowly made our way toward the conservatory. Neither of us knew that the conversation waiting on the other side of those doors would reveal exactly why Kevin had suddenly decided he wanted his father back. And this time, it had nothing to do with family. When Kevin walked into the conservatory, his first words sounded caring. But Harold saw through the performance almost instantly. And within minutes, one simple question would expose the truth Kevin had desperately tried to hide. The moment I saw Kevin standing inside Harold's conservatory, I knew something wasn't right. 3 months had passed since he left me at South Station. 3 months without asking where I lived. 3 months without wondering if I was safe. And now, somehow, he had found me. But what happened during the next 30 minutes exposed the truth in a way none of us expected. As Harold and I entered the conservatory, I immediately saw Kevin and Stephanie standing near the center of the room. Sunlight poured through the enormous glass walls, reflecting off hundreds of orchids that filled the space with color. Normally, it was the most peaceful room in the house. That afternoon, it felt like a courtroom. Kevin looked different. His expensive suit was perfectly pressed, but his confidence seemed forced. Stephanie wore a polite smile, yet her eyes darted around the room, taking in every crystal chandelier, every antique sculpture, every priceless painting she could see through the open doorway. Neither of them looked surprised by the mansion. They looked impressed. That alone told me they had already done their homework. The moment Kevin saw me, he spread his arms. Dad! His voice sounded unusually cheerful. There you are. Before I could answer, he stepped forward as though we hadn't spent months barely speaking. We've been worried sick. I stared at him. Worried? The word felt almost laughable. You stopped answering our calls, Stephanie added quickly, placing a hand dramatically over her heart. The kids miss you so much. I folded my arms. I returned every phone call. Kevin hesitated. Well, you didn't exactly tell us where you were. His eyes drifted toward Harold. You've been staying here the whole time? Harold calmly wheeled himself forward. His voice remained polite. I'm Harold Montgomery. I've had the pleasure of Robert's company these past few months. Kevin immediately extended his hand. Kevin Morrison. Robert's son. His smile grew wider. We really appreciate everything you've done for my father. Harold shook his hand once. Firmly. Then let go. My pleasure. An awkward silence followed. Finally Stephanie cleared her throat. We've talked things over. We made a mistake. She looked directly at me. We'd really like you to come home. I blinked. Home? She nodded enthusiastically. The children ask about you every day. Emma especially. We've realized how important family is. I studied both of their faces. Something felt rehearsed. Like they had practiced these lines in the car before arriving. Harold quietly looked toward me. Robert. What do you think? Every eye in the room turned toward me. Kevin looked hopeful. Stephanie smiled encouragingly. I took a slow breath. Then answered honestly. I think. You threw me out on Thanksgiving. Their smiles faded. You packed my bag. You drove me to South Station. You left me there with $45. And neither of you cared what happened after that. Kevin immediately raised his hands. Dad, we were stressed. We weren't thinking clearly. No, I replied. You were thinking very clearly. You just weren't thinking about me. The room fell silent. Harold watched quietly for a moment before speaking. I'm curious. He looked directly at Kevin. What changed? Kevin blinked. I'm sorry. What caused this sudden change of heart? You've gone from asking your father to leave to wanting him back. Why? Kevin hesitated. We don't want anyone taking advantage of him. For the first time, I saw irritation flash across Harold's face. Taking advantage? His voice remained calm, but noticeably colder. That's an interesting concern. Especially coming from the people who accepted $30,000 from him. Allowed him to babysit for free. Accepted his rent. Accepted his grocery money. And then asked him to leave. Neither Kevin nor Stephanie said a word. Harold turned toward me. Robert. May I ask them a few questions? I nodded. Go ahead. Harold looked back at Kevin. When is your father's birthday? Kevin answered quickly. April. Harold smiled. The date? Silence. Kevin frowned. Stephanie looked equally uncomfortable. I quietly answered. April 14th. Harold nodded. Interesting. He asked another question. What position did your father retire from? Kevin brightened. He worked for Boston Edison. Correct. Harold smiled. And his title? Kevin's face froze. He searched desperately for the answer. Nothing. I quietly spoke. Senior electrical engineer. You gave a speech at my retirement party. I looked directly into Kevin's eyes. You don't remember any of it. His shoulders dropped. Dad. We've all forgotten things. I shook my head. No. You forgot me. The room became painfully quiet. Years of disappointment poured out of me. I worked double shifts after your mother left. I skipped meals so you could eat. I sold investments to pay your college tuition. I helped raise your children. I gave you almost everything I'd saved. And when I needed a little help after surgery, you decided I was taking up too much space. Kevin's eyes filled with tears. I know. I made a terrible mistake. Did you? I asked quietly. Or did you make two mistakes? The first was throwing me away. The second was assuming no one else would ever value me. No one spoke. Even Stephanie had lowered her eyes. Finally, Harold broke the silence. I believe this conversation has reached its conclusion. He looked toward the doorway. Almost instantly, Charles appeared. As always, sir. Please escort our guests to the front entrance. Kevin looked at me one last time. Dad. Please. I didn't answer. Not because I hated him. Because I honestly didn't know what to say anymore. Charles gently guided them toward the door. Neither Kevin nor Stephanie argued. The moment they disappeared, I collapsed into one of the conservatory chairs. I buried my face in my hands. I never wanted this brought into your home. Harold slowly rolled beside me. My friend. He said quietly. Don't apologize. He placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. If anything, today confirmed something I've been thinking about for weeks. I looked up. What do you mean? Harold took a deep breath. Then spoke words that would change my future forever. Robert. I'm changing my will. My heart nearly stopped. What? I've already made my decision. He looked directly into my eyes. And after what I witnessed today, I've never been more certain. I had no idea that Harold's decision would soon shake every life connected to mine. A few weeks later, Harold took his final breath. But before he left this world, he made one last decision that no one, not Kevin, not Stephanie, not even I, was prepared for. And when his will was finally read, the room fell completely silent. When Harold told me he was changing his will, I begged him not to. I had only known him for a few months. There were people who had known him for decades. I didn't want his fortune. I didn't need his estate. The only thing I wanted was more time with the man who had become the father, brother, and friend I never knew I still needed. But time was the one thing even Harold Montgomery couldn't buy. The weeks after Kevin's visit felt different. Not because Harold had changed, but because I had. For the first time, I truly understood how much our friendship meant to him. He wasn't simply giving me a place to live. He was giving me a family. And somewhere along the way, without either of us realizing it, he had become mine too. Still, I couldn't shake what he'd said in the conservatory. I'm changing my will. Every time I thought about those words, they made me uncomfortable. One afternoon, while we were sitting in the library organizing another box of Margaret's letters, I finally brought it up. Harold. He looked up from an old photograph. I've been thinking about what you said. The will. His smile softened. I wondered how long it'd take before you asked. I leaned forward. I don't want your money. He chuckled. I know. I'm serious. You have charities. Longtime employees. Distant relatives. People who've been part of your life for years. You barely know me. Harold quietly closed the photo album. Then he looked directly into my eyes. No, Robert. I know exactly who you are. He folded his hands together. Do you know why successful people often make terrible decisions? I frowned. I have no idea. Because they spend their lives judging people by accomplishments. He smiled. I spent decades doing exactly that. Balance sheets. Contracts. Investments. Profits. He shook his head. But when you're told your life is coming to an end, you stop asking what people achieved. You start asking who they really are. The room fell silent. I've watched you these last few months. You thank everyone. You treat every employee in this house with respect. You ask Charles about his grandchildren. You compliment Mrs. Patterson's cooking every single evening. You stop whatever you're doing whenever Clara walks in because you believe people deserve your full attention. He smiled warmly. You've never once asked me what I'm worth. You've only ever asked how I'm feeling. I lowered my eyes. That's what friends do. Exactly. He pointed at me. And that's precisely why I trust you. As Charles wheeled him toward dinner, I asked gently. A week later, Harold's attorney arrived at the estate. Her name was Patricia Wells. A sharp, confident woman in her 60s who had represented Harold for nearly 4 decades. She spent most of the afternoon reviewing documents in Harold's study. Occasionally I heard quiet conversations through the closed doors. Sometimes laughter. Sometimes long periods of silence. When she finally left, Harold looked exhausted. But peaceful. I felt remembered. 3 mornings later. Everything changed. The house felt unusually quiet. Charles knocked softly on my bedroom door just after sunrise. His eyes were red. Mr. Robert. I immediately knew. Without saying another word, I hurried toward Harold's room. He was lying peacefully in bed. The morning sunlight filtered gently through the curtains. Birds chirped outside the window. His breathing was slow. Shallow. I quietly pulled a chair beside him and took his hand. His eyes opened. He smiled. "Morning. Morning," I whispered. "You should be resting." "I've done enough resting." His voice was barely audible now. He looked toward the garden outside his window. "The roses. They're blooming." I nodded. "They're beautiful." He squeezed my hand gently. "Margaret would have loved them." A long silence followed. Then he turned back toward me. "You know, I was afraid." "Of what?" "That everything I'd built would disappear." He smiled weakly. "Not the buildings. The purpose." His eyes never left mine. "I don't worry about that anymore." Emotion overwhelmed me. "You gave me my life back, Harold." He slowly shook his head. "No. We gave each other one." A tear rolled down my cheek. "I'll never forget you." His smile grew softer. "I know." He closed his eyes for a moment. Then whispered one final sentence. "Tell Margaret. I'm coming home." His grip slowly relaxed. And just like that, the kindest man I'd ever known was gone. The funeral brought together hundreds of people. Business leaders. Military veterans. Politicians. Hospital directors. Employees who had worked beside Harold for decades. Every single person had a story about how he'd quietly changed someone's life. As I listened, I realized something. None of them talked about his money. They talked about his kindness. His integrity. His generosity. That was the legacy he'd truly built. Kevin and Stephanie attended too. They sat quietly near the back of the chapel. Neither of them approached me. Neither knew what Harold had already set into motion. 10 days later, we gathered inside Patricia Wells' law office for the reading of Harold Montgomery's will. The room felt heavy. Charles sat beside me. Several company executives filled the remaining seats. Kevin and Stephanie walked in together, dressed in black, their expressions impossible to read. Patricia adjusted her glasses before opening the thick leather folder. She calmly reviewed Harold's many charitable donations. Millions designated for hospitals. Scholarships. Veterans organizations. The Sarah Montgomery Pediatric Cancer Foundation. Charles received a generous gift along with the right to live on the estate for the rest of his life. Everyone nodded respectfully. Then Patricia reached the final pages. "And now." She paused. "The remainder of Mr. Montgomery's estate. The Montgomery estate. His controlling interest in Montgomery properties. His investment portfolio. And all remaining personal assets." She looked directly at me. "Are hereby left to Robert Edward Thornton." The room froze. No one moved. No one even breathed. Then, Kevin shot to his feet. "That's impossible." His voice echoed through the conference room. "He barely knew my father." Patricia remained perfectly calm. Mr. Montgomery anticipated this reaction. She reached into another envelope. He prepared a recorded statement and a personal letter explaining every decision he made. Kevin's face turned pale. Patricia unfolded the letter. "As requested by Mr. Montgomery. I will now read it aloud." No one realized it yet. But Harold had one final lesson to teach everyone in that room. And none of us would ever forget it. Harold's final letter didn't just reveal why he left me everything. It exposed the painful truth about family, forgiveness, and the choices that define a person's character. By the time Patricia finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye left in the room. Everyone in that room expected Harold's last message to explain the money. Instead, it explained something far more valuable. It explained character. Patricia unfolded the handwritten letter with great care. The room was completely silent. Even Kevin had stopped arguing. She adjusted her glasses before reading Harold's final words. To everyone gathered here today. If you're hearing this letter, then I've finally been reunited with Margaret and Sarah. That thought brings me more peace than sadness, so I hope none of you waste today mourning my departure. Celebrate a life that was filled with blessings instead. Patricia paused briefly before continuing. Many of you may wonder why I've chosen to leave the majority of my estate to Robert Thornton, a man I only knew for a few short months. Kevin folded his arms tightly. Stephanie stared at the floor. Patricia continued. The answer is simple. Most people spend their lives believing trust is earned through time. I disagree. Trust is earned through character. The room remained perfectly still. During the short time Robert was in my home, he revealed more about who he truly was than many people reveal in a lifetime. He treated every employee with dignity. He expected nothing in return. He never once asked about my finances. He cared about my health long before he knew the size of my estate. I lowered my head, struggling to hold back tears. Patricia smiled gently before reading the next paragraph. The greatest gift Robert ever gave me wasn't companionship. It was reminding an old man that kindness still exists. He never made me feel like a burden. He never rushed our conversations. He listened to stories he'd probably heard 3 times already and laughed every single time. A quiet chuckle spread through the room. Even Charles smiled through watery eyes. Then Patricia reached the final page. Her voice grew softer. To Robert. I looked up. My friend. If you're hearing this, I know you're probably wishing I'd left everything to someone else. A few people smiled knowingly. Harold knew me too well. That's exactly why I chose you. You've spent your entire life putting other people first. Now it's time someone put you first. Tears blurred my vision. Patricia continued reading. Don't think of this estate as a reward. Think of it as a responsibility. Protect this home. Take care of the people who have dedicated their lives to it. Keep Margaret's roses blooming. Feed the birds every morning. Open these doors to people who feel forgotten, just as I opened them to you. My chest tightened. I could almost hear Harold's voice saying every word. Then came his final message. The one that none of us would ever forget. Families are not created by blood alone. They're created by the people who choose to stand beside you when life becomes difficult. If someone abandons you, don't let their decision convince you that you're unworthy of love. Sometimes losing the wrong people creates room for the right ones to enter your life. That Thanksgiving, I thought I was rescuing Robert. The truth is, he rescued me. Patricia quietly folded the letter. No one spoke. Several people wiped tears from their eyes. The room wasn't mourning a billionaire. It was honoring an extraordinary human being. Kevin slowly stood. His confident attitude had completely disappeared. His eyes were red. He looked older somehow. Smaller. He walked toward me cautiously. Dad. His voice trembled. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I remained silent. He swallowed hard. I've replayed Thanksgiving in my head every single day. I keep asking myself how I became the kind of son who could leave his own father at a train station. His shoulders slumped. I don't have an excuse. I only have regret. For the first time, I believed him. Not because of his words, Because of the pain on his face. Real regret doesn't defend itself. It simply admits the truth. He looked down. I know I can't change what I did. But if there's ever a chance, I'd like to earn my way back into your life. I thought about Harold. About everything he'd taught me. About forgiveness. About refusing to let bitterness become permanent. Then I slowly stood. I walked toward Kevin. He looked terrified. Not of losing money. Of losing his father forever. I placed my hand gently on his shoulder. I forgive you. His eyes filled instantly. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust. I spoke calmly. Trust has to be rebuilt. One decision at a time. He nodded through tears. I understand. And I'm willing to spend the rest of my life earning it. For the first time in months. I hugged my son. Not because everything was fixed. Because healing had finally begun. Over the next year. Life changed in ways I never could have imagined. I honored every promise I'd made to Harold. Charles stayed exactly where he belonged, as the heart of the estate. Mrs. Patterson continued filling the house with incredible meals. Clara remained part of the family she'd helped care for over so many years. Together, we transformed part of the mansion into the Harold and Margaret Montgomery Veterans and Family Retreat. Every Thanksgiving, we invited elderly veterans, widows, and people with nowhere else to go. No reservations. No questions. Just a warm meal. A welcoming table. And the reminder that no one deserves to spend the holidays alone. Kevin volunteered every year. So did Stephanie. Emma and her younger brother served desserts, carried plates, and listened to the stories of veterans who reminded them of the grandfather they almost lost. Slowly. Very slowly. Our family found its way back to each other. Not because of an inheritance. Because we finally understood what truly mattered. Sometimes, just before sunset, I still sit on the wooden bench overlooking Margaret's rose garden. The bird feeder swings gently in the breeze. The roses bloom exactly where Harold promised they would. And every now and then, a robin lands nearby. I smile. Because I can almost hear Harold's voice. See, Robert? Life always finds a way to begin again. I've come to believe he was right. The greatest wealth any person can leave behind isn't money. It isn't property. It isn't success. It's the kindness they plant in other people's lives. Kindness keeps growing. Long after we're gone. So if you're watching this today and you're carrying the weight of rejection, if someone has made you feel unwanted, if you've been convinced that your best days are behind you, remember this. Your worth has never been determined by the people who failed to appreciate you. Sometimes the hardest goodbye becomes the first step toward the life you were always meant to find. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If Harold's story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need this reminder today. And never forget. Your story isn't over yet. Sometimes, the most beautiful chapter begins the moment you think the book is ending. See you in the next story.